Thank you for listening to this Podcast One production.
WWE superstars, TV personalities, and entrepreneurs Nikki and Brie Bella are turning off the camera and turning on the mics in the Bellas podcast. The Celebrity Twins will give you the real dirt, from juicy dating recaps to what celebrity momtrepreneur life is really like. Want to debate whether one-night stands are better drunk or sober? So do Nikki and Brie. Kick back, pop open a bottle, and dish with the Bella Twins on the Bellas podcast every Wednesday. Listen free on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get podcasts.
Your life, your country. You're listening to the Laura Ingraham Podcast.
Well, Trump was going to be frog marched out of the Oval Office in an orange jumpsuit, remember? Trump was not going to finish out his first term. Remember that? Trump has been conspiring with Vladimir Putin for years and planned to run for president so he could make money after he left the presidency. Now, this man was selling out the country. He was a traitor. This sedition would be exposed by this, in-depth investigation by Bob Mueller and his 19 prosecutors. And the Democrats were dining out on this for 2 years. Every move in foreign policy that had any tangential relationship to Russia was judged through the Russian lens. You're listening to the Laura Ingraham Podcast, joined by Raymond Arroyo. We have a great lineup. Dershowitz is going to be with us, Congressman Mark Meadows, Victor Davis Hanson, and a lot more. And I want to thank all of our great sponsors, Genucel and Serovidal. They help provide this podcast free for you every week, and you're going to learn more about their special offers later in the show. So Serovital and Genucel, awesome partners of the Laura Ingraham Podcast. If you want to be part of the podcast, remember, all you need to do is email us at ingram.podcast@gmail.com. That's ingram.podcast@gmail.com. So it's hard to really overstate the damage that this farce of an investigation did to our political landscape, the money that was wasted, of course, beyond the $30 million of the taxpayers, the time. Don't you think if we really wanted 19 prosecutors to be working 12 and 13, 15 hours a day, would want them to be working on cases that would really help the country? And instead, their big trophies on the wall were, we got George Papadopoulos, and we indicted Russians who will never show up in the country for their hearings, and wait, Paul Manafort at age 69, now he's 70, I guess April 1st he's 70. Paul Manafort's going to go away. So this is what the whole thing was focused on.
Don't forget Roger Stone. They got Roger Stone.
Oh yeah, that's right, Roger Stone. They showed up with at Roger Stone's door with guns drawn, and of course they had this the amphibious vehicles. And again, another. It's a travesty that this happened.
It's a dumb show.
I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Does the public understand just how much trouble the president is in?
To believe that the president isn't compromised requires such a leap of faith.
I think we have all the proof we need of a scandal that's arguably worse than Watergate.
Do we know if there is still this belief and aspect that the president is working for the Russians? I can't answer that.
There is tons of proof of potential collusion.
We have dramatic evidence of collusion.
How is it not collusion?
A political hurricane is out there at sea for him. We'll call it Hurricane Vladimir, if you will.
Donald Trump knows the noose is tightening.
The noose is tightening.
The noose is tightening.
Well, I think they're all going to end up together in prison, and maybe that's a good thing.
Oh, my God.
All right, we get it. Okay, so the left was completely over the top, absurd, and wrong. I mean, wrong. Apparently there are absolutely no repercussions for being wrong. None.
Not even contrition, Laura. You would think that decency would dictate, all right, look, I was wrong. I should have been a little more restrained in my commentary. You don't even get that from these people. Nothing.
No, you get nothing. You get nothing. You just get, we're just going to go back on television like it was, everything's hunky-dory. Like we didn't just completely lie for 2 years to the American public. See, and I think that is something we have to stress. These were lies told to the American public. And it's a combination of an irresponsible press and political class, a dishonest press and political class, a biased press, political class, entertainment elites, all of them combined trying to undo the 2016 election cycle. That's what this was all about from the beginning. And they had to believe this because they couldn't believe in their heart of hearts that Donald Trump won on his own merits. Don't you think that's part of it, Raymond?
Absolutely. No, it's an arrogance. Look, this is a determined arrogance. And as we were talking the other night, Laura, when the news dropped live on Friday, we got a glimpse of these people that we all look to for information, unvarnished. And you saw the reality setting in as they watched the narratives they've been threading for 2 years crumble before their eyes. And they didn't know what to say. They were caught so flat-footed. And in the recent days, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, they've come up with a new line of attack. Barr's not to be believed. Mueller really didn't say Trump was exonerated. He let Barr make the decision, and why is that? They've come up with all these other stupid questions that, frankly, are not germane.
It's just embarrassing. It's completely embarrassing. And the Morning Joe crowd that was obviously leading the attacks on Trump for the last 2 years, claiming that he clearly had some affinity for Russia that could only be explained by some type of a coordinated deal between Trump and the Russian government. Otherwise, you couldn't explain why Trump was so pro-Russia. And I love how being pro-Russia, for them, Trump has all these added sanctions on them. Okay, we went back and did missile defense. We're proclaiming in Europe no to the Nord Stream pipeline, the new pipeline coming into Europe. Don't you dare even think about doing that. So Trump put all this pressure on Russia.
Expelled all those diplomats.
Oh, yeah, expelled all the diplomats. But Trump was secretly conspiring with Vladimir Putin, and we were going to get to the bottom of this, and Mueller was going to deliver this manna from heaven. It was manna from Mueller. Not manna from hell. It was manna from Mueller. It was going to drop down, and then Donald Trump would be run out of office. How many times did we hear that Donald Trump wasn't going to finish his first term? I mean, we heard that over and over again. So on Morning Joe today, on MSNBC, again, Raymond Arroyo just said, was there any contrition? Well, you listen.
Just because you're sucking up to Donald Trump, and just because power is all that matters to you, and just because you will justify everything that man does, and just because you are corrupt, just because you're not a journalist, just because you have sold your soul to a personality cult, don't knock reporters at the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal or the broadcast networks for doing their job right.
Get the old Scarborough hitting Trump. That's what we want. That's how you produce this. Get the old Scarborough. Scarborough was spending 2 years on Donald Trump in Russia.
They were conspiring with Russians, a criminal conspiracy possibly. Anybody that writes an op-ed and suggests that Donald Trump has not put himself directly in the target of an obstruction charge is just fooling themselves and some very, very stupid, ill-informed readers.
So you just heard Scarborough today, and then we just played for you a bunch of Scarborough from over the last 2 years about Russia. And we're the problem? That's a really neat trick. How's that Florida tax haven working out for you, Joe?
Laura, the remarkable thing here is you were one of the people questioning the predicate for this entire investigation and why this was going on and whether it was justified from its inception. That should have been the curiosity that filled these journalists covering the story, not creating fables that built up an unrealistic outcome, which now we realize they sold everybody a lie. There was no Russian collusion. It never existed. It was all a fraud and a farce. And to pretend that the journalists who had enabled this and were party to it somehow should be left off the hook. Remember, it was because of journalists being used by Christopher Steele at the beginning that this entire probe began. The media can't just say, well, we were covering it. No. You drove the story. You created it.
You're listening to the Laura Ingraham podcast, and this was what Lara Logan said on the Ingraham angle. Again, award-winning journalist, covered pretty much every war of the last 20 years. She had a very sober and it was really a startling commentary on the way so-called journalists covered this. Is she also part of the Trump personality cult, Joe? Let's listen.
Laura, I've been a journalist for more than 3 decades, and I have to say that I feel ashamed. This is a terrible moment for us as journalists, and I've been saying for several years now that accountability begins with us. People across this country ask me all the time about fake news and how we got to this point where there's so little trust in the media, and you see it. It's plain right in front of you right here. And I'll give you one of the most frustrating examples for me from the beginning is, do you remember when everyone was making fun of the president for saying that he was wiretapped during the campaign, that the Trump Tower was being wiretapped? And we got lost in a conversation about semantics, and he was lampooned by the media. But later it emerged that the president's campaign and Trump Tower were being surveilled by the intelligence agencies, which is obvious that's exactly what he meant. And no one stood up then and said, oh, the president was right. The intelligence agencies were listening to his campaign. So it didn't surprise me that journalists weren't, ready to stand up and say, oh, we were wrong and the president was right. That's not surprising, but it doesn't make it any better. It's not a fine moment for journalists, and journalism is all I've done all my life.
Joining us now is lawyer, of course, former professor at Harvard Law School, author, the book, The Case Against Impeaching Trump. Well, they didn't impeach Trump, or they didn't, well, they might. They still might impeach Trump. Dershowitz joins us now. Alan, how are you?
I'm good. They're not going to impeach Trump. They're not even going to try to impeach Trump at this point. I think what we have to do is start looking at the media and asking the media about their responsibility for this entire episode that lasted so many years. Just today I saw that Jeff Zucker of CNN announced how proud he was of CNN's coverage.
Yeah.
Well, that really tells an interesting story. I'm sure he is proud because I think he made a lot of money for CNN. I think he made a decision at some point. CNN should stop being unbiased, should stop reporting both sides of the issue, should make it into an anti-Trump channel from morning to night, and that way they'll make a lot of money. The ACLU did the same thing. They had a $30 million budget, went up to $130 million when they stopped caring about civil liberties and only focused on how do we get Trump. So, getting Trump is a good way to make money, but it's not a good way of advising and informing fairly the American public. People who watched only CNN were shocked at the Mueller report because they fully anticipated indictments and impeachment because they were guaranteed by their pundits that that would happen. People who watched other channels had a completely different view. They were not surprised at the results. I have to get personal for a second. CNN used to have me on periodically to talk on several of the shows, and then Zucker made a decision. No more Dershowitz, because what we don't want is a liberal Democrat centrist who doesn't buy our narrative. It's okay if we have some right-wing Republicans, but not any liberal centrist who makes a sensible case against what's going on with the investigation. So I was basically banned for the last 8 months from CNN, and the viewers were denied an opportunity to hear all sides of the issue.
Alan, the disturbing thing about all of this is that there was so much in the way of collateral damage in this investigation. There were 500 people interviewed, most of those hired attorneys. Most of them don't have a lot of money. Enormous anxiety, travel expenses, all the speculation. If you were interviewed by Mueller, there was a good chance that your reputation was dragged through the mud because you happened to be caught up in this in one way or another. You had these minor figures like George Papadopoulos. Like, he became the subject of hours and hours and hours of coverage on MSNBC and CNN. And in the end, there is a big goose egg on the primo target that they had.
No, I agree with that. And, I think of Jared Kushner and other members of the family who were also brought into this thing, and they and their family suffered. They had to spend a lot of time with lawyers, and it turned out, there was no evidence whatsoever of any coordination between the campaign and Russia. Look, Russia tried to influence the election, and there should have been an independent, nonpartisan expert commission appointed to look at efforts by Russia to influence the election. That would have been a useful thing to do, an open inquiry, not behind the closed doors, without finger-pointing, but that didn't happen. What happened instead was, let's get Trump. Let's get Trump all the time, every minute. And that misled and deceived the American public and created an opportunity for the Democrats to score political points. I think it backfired for the most part.
You know what's really interesting? Eric Swalwell, who's one of the people who said that Trump was guilty, basically, of treason, he called into MSNBC and essentially doubled down.
The only person who has made false statements about Russia is Donald Trump. And I stand by what I have said about seeing evidence of collusion. And if he has a problem with that, he can sue me. And I promise you I would win in court.
So he says, sue me, and I'm just going to keep saying you colluded.
Well, he's not going to sue, obviously, and so we can keep saying it. But, you're right. Reputation has been ruined, and people have been attacked needlessly. We never should have had a special counsel. There was no need for that at all. And in the end, the special counsel didn't succeed. On the Russia issue, he indicted no Americans for any illegal activities in relation to Russia. And on the obstruction of justice, he punted. He didn't have the courage of his convictions to even come to a conclusion about Russia. He just left it to the Attorney General and the Deputy. The Deputy Attorney General, of course, was conflicted. He was a witness to the alleged obstruction of justice because he wrote the memorandum that justified the firing of Comey. And he shouldn't have played any role at all in the decision whether or not to charge the president for obstruction of justice. He came to the right decision, but he was still conflicted.
Well, Alan, at this point, the left is now saying that it's the Barr report. They don't even say it's the Mueller report, and then they say, well, Barr is just a flunky of Trump. So the fact that Mueller went to Barr and Rosenstein to decide on the issue of obstruction shows that this is really a Trump preordained outcome, and so the entire report is basically illegitimate, at least as far as obstruction goes. That's their new argument.
Well, I've known Barr for many, many years. He's one of the most distinguished, upstanding lawyers in America. I was very pleasantly surprised when President Trump appointed him because he's not anybody who's going to take orders from anybody. He doesn't need the job. He's been Attorney General of the United States already. And, he's a terrific man, and I think he called it exactly right.
Well, and what do you think as far as the Democrats go on where they go next on this? Is it time to, is it time to just move to issues here and figure out what they stand for? Because this has been so much a part of the Democrat identity for the last 2 years. I think they left the door open for socialism, which is what exactly happened with these newbie freshmen, and they're trotting around these ideas about socialism and scaring the heck out of people.
Well, I'm a Democrat. I want to do what's good for the Democrats. I want to see the Democrats win. The Democrats won the midterm because they focused on the issues. And those candidates who focused on impeaching Trump didn't do as well as those who didn't. So I would hope the Democrats would get back to the business of legislating, stop all of this investigation. The investigations are going nowhere. And you can overdo investigations. During the McCarthy period, the Supreme Court and other courts struck down some subpoenas because they were improperly issued, not for a legitimate legislative purpose, but simply to harass and expose, and that's not the proper function of Congress. So I would hope the Democrats would get back to legislating and get back to trying to show that their policies are better, that they would try to marginalize the extremists on the left and make it clear that they're not the mainstream of the Democratic Party. And then they would have a shot at winning the election in 2020. Right now, they're shooting themselves in the foot over and over and over again.
Well, Brennan, of course, former CIA director, spoke, about 100 times about how Trump was compromised by the Russians. And today, he's singing a different tune. This is how he explains away his point.
Did you receive bad information throughout this process, like so many of us did, that there was more there than ended up in the report regarding collusion?
Well, I don't know if I received bad information, but I think I suspected that there was more than there actually was. I still point to things that were done publicly or efforts to try to have conversations with the Russians that were inappropriate. But I'm not all that surprised that the high bar of criminal conspiracy was not met.
I mean, that's quite something. He literally said that Trump was guilty of treason. You know, and now it's, well, he might have behaved inappropriately. And we're all supposed to just forgive and forget. I'm sorry.
Well, the worst part of it is he says he got bad information. He was the conveyor of the bad information. He and the person who were questioning him were on television all the time giving the rest of us bad information. And because it comes from the recent former head of the CIA, everybody credits it. He must know. He has sources. He was there. He knows the secrets. So that's what's wrong with people who were former directors of the CIA and the FBI getting on television as talking heads. We give too much credit to their conclusions because we think they know things we don't know. It turned out we knew things they didn't know. And, you know, I've been right from day one on this. I said there'd be no evidence of any collusion and that constitutionally obstruction of justice would not be possible for the president exercising his authority under Article 2, and people didn't listen to me. People didn't want to hear that. They wanted to hear he was guilty. So wishful thinking substituted for careful analysis, and I think the wishful thinkers now have to apologize to the people that they misled.
Alan, at this point, the Democrats are not giving up on these hearings. Jerry Nadler says he's going to continue. He's going to press on. Some of the newbie freshmen, like Congresswoman Tlaib, saying she will absolutely keep the banner of impeachment flying over the Democrat Party. That statement was put out last night. Where does that leave the Democrats today? If the energy in their party is saying impeach, Maxine Waters, others saying the same thing, then how do you just, as a party like Schumer and these guys and Pelosi, how do they just dismiss those energetic forces within the party?
Look, people like Schumer and Pelosi have a real problem today because they want to encourage young people to join the party. They understand they have new young members of Congress who appeal to a lot of people who previously didn't vote. They don't want to lose them, but they don't want them to have much influence in the party because they don't want to run on a socialist, anti-Israel, other kind of ticket. So they're trying to handle it in a nuanced way, and they're not succeeding. Their refusal to accept a resolution condemning anti-Semitism backfired on them, and I think will continue to backfire on them. They have to make a decision to marginalize the extremes of the party and to move to the center and to be represented by people, you know, more like Joe Biden and less like some of the extreme new Congress people or even some of the people who are running for president. You know, the people who are running for president now aren't running to be president. They're running to be the nominee. And so they're running to win primaries. They know that if they win the nomination, they're going to have to move to the center if they want to win the election. Everybody remembers what happened when the Democrats nominated Mondale, Dukakis, McGovern. I think between the three of them, they won 10 states. And Democrats can't win from the left. They can only win from the center. And I think the wiser heads in the Democratic Party realize that.
Alan Dershowitz, thank you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. We have a lot more to get to on the Laura Ingraham podcast as we unpack what was a travesty of 2 years that subjected our country to hours and hours and hours, hundreds and hundreds of hours of idiocy on television, of erroneous reporting, and recriminations, calumny, defamation. I mean, the president was defamed on a daily basis. And everyone's supposed to just like, oh, so let's just keep going on as normal? No. Do you agree with me that there must be repercussions for this behavior? That means political, professional, journalistic, legal repercussions, and that this should be investigated from day one. What happened from day one to trigger this investigation and how this can be prevented from ever happening, as President Trump said, to any president in the future. using the power of the U.S. surveillance state as a political weapon to trigger an investigation. BuzzFeed.
You guys on this network
What have I done?
have tortured this man for 2 years with collusion, and nobody's apologized.
First of all,
so before we talk about obstruction, apologize for the overreaction of collusion.
Not a chance.
Well, of course you're not.
Not a chance.
Of course you're not, because you're not being fair.
No, please. You know better than that, or you wouldn't
No,
be
I
here.
don't know better. I am outraged by the behavior of these networks.
Okay.
Collusion, 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 collusion,
First of all,
collusion. No collusion.
Okay, here's my
no
case.
collusion.
Here's my case.
Apologize.
Never.
Well, of course they're not going to apologize. Being a liberal means never having to say you're sorry. Here's what we have right now. We have a Democrat Party in denial. They're in denial about how left-wing they've become. They're in denial about how far they went down this Mueller rat hole and how much it hurt them. They're in denial about what's happening at the border. They're in denial about the strength of the Trump economy. It's basically a party in denial. Radicalism doesn't work. Radicalism ultimately leads to where they are right now, where they're trying to explain away facts, inconvenient facts. And so they remain in denial.
The media, the press has done one of the great reporting jobs in the history. Let's look at where the disinformation and mistakes and lying have come from. Hasn't come from the press. It's come from the President of the United States.
The media has nothing to apologize for, according to Carl Bernstein. Nothing to apologize for. Well, Chris Cuomo, no, I'm not going to apologize. Joe Scarborough, how dare you question? How dare you question the media? The media did exactly what they're supposed to be doing. The one thing the media did right is on Monday, they actually had headlines in the Washington Post and New York Times that were fair. And that I almost fell over. Joining us now, Congressman Mark Meadows, Freedom Caucus member, great state of North Carolina, chairman of the Freedom Caucus. And Congressman Meadows, my monologue on Fox basically was called The Reckoning. And it's my sense that if we don't have repercussions for this type of nefarious behavior, the plotting against American citizens, the trying to undo the election, if there are not repercussions for that, it's just going to happen again. And we can't allow that to happen.
Well, you're exactly right, Laura. It can't happen again. You know, they said that Trump would fire Mueller, and he didn't. They said that Trump would obstruct the investigation. He didn't. They said that there was Russia collusion. There was none. And yet here we have the headlines, and you mentioned the Washington Post, New York Times. At least they had, top of the fold headlines that were accurate. But what we've got to do is make sure that there is accountability for the people who started this narrative to begin with, and hopefully we will be able to do that.
So what can happen now? Bill Barr obviously is going to be making decisions, a judge involved perhaps, about whether to make this thing public, which I imagine that will happen with some redactions. And then what? What do you hope that he does that follows on?
Well, obviously, he's going to look at the redactions and making sure that innocent people are protected, also making sure that what we have is national security interests that are protected. But what I'm hopeful that he does is ends up spending some time where we can actually put forth the narrative of the fact that Glenn Simpson gave false testimony to the Department of Justice. I mean, we know that by the 302 notes that Bruce Orr took, that Glenn Simpson actually gave false information to the Department of Justice. Will there be accountability there? I believe that Attorney General Barr will not only make sure that we have full disclosure in a lot of different places as it relates to the Mueller report, but also full disclosure on those individuals that need to be held accountable. And hopefully the mainstream media, you've been at really the pivotal point on a lot of this, where you've been covering it accurately for 2 years, Laura, but yet a lot of our media friends were not doing that. And so hopefully we'll be able to push back and make sure that they understand that credibility has to be the first priority.
Well, I think, again, when you had $30 million U.S. taxpayer money spent, all the legal fees, Congressman Meadows, that the individuals had to had to spend all the money they shelled out for the interviews that they did with Mueller and the defamatory comments made about this president and many others. I mean, I was called an agent of the Russian government, for goodness sakes. And I'm sure you were at some point, too. I mean, this can't be allowed to just become another short news cycle. That's what I'm really concerned about. Because if you don't have credibility on this issue, you don't have credibility on any issue, any substantive issue in politics.
Well, you're exactly right. And the credibility factor, it undermines what people will start to listen to going forward. I mean, now, when they said that you were an agent of the Russian government, I don't know that anybody, except maybe the far left, took that seriously. I know anyone on Capitol Hill that knows you did not take it seriously because you're a serious journalist wanting to get to the truth. But what happens is there's so many false narratives out there, and I predict that this news cycle will be so short. I mean, there is not going to be a whole lot of falling on the swords and saying that this is bad or not.
Yeah, no, there'll be no soul searching here. This will all be, let's move on to socialism. Let's move on to, the Trump Tower or
you're
inaugural.
Right. It'll be part of the 81, letters or the 81 inquiries that Chairman Nadler put forth. They're just going to move on to the new crisis of the day. And sadly, it's not about proper oversight. It is about going after this president because they did not like the election results from November of 2016. And so we've got to make sure we push back. The truth is on our side, and it'll be good for the American people to see that transparency.
By the way, Lindsey Graham announced this morning, Raymond's just telling me, that he's launched an investigation into the FISA warrants. I think that is critical that's done, given the fact that we had the U.S. government using all of its intelligence force to weaponize, politics against political opposition. That's how this whole thing started. With Carter Page surveillance, Trump's campaign was surveilled by the U.S. government.
Well, it was without a doubt. Chairman Graham and I spoke last night. We've been talking over the last several weeks. We've got a plethora of documents that we're sharing with him that will hopefully start to unwind this story. And you mentioned that President Trump talked about surveillance. I think the George Papadopoulos transcribed interview comes out today.
Oh,
and
good.
When that happens, I think people will start to say, well, gosh, was this guy actually surveilled by the FBI and FBI informants? Was he privately taped? Those questions have to be answered, and hopefully we will get to the bottom of it where we will realize, I think when we do, we'll realize that the president was more accurate in his assessment than wrong.
Well, he was just really frustrated. He was really frustrated that he was being called a traitor to his country and being called all these names, and he fired back, and he was livid. I don't blame him, frankly, for being as mad as he was. When they're saying, well, his behavior really raised questions. Well, what if you were called a traitor by major news organizations day in and day out? Would you be upset? Yeah, I'd be really upset.
Of course. Well, when you're falsely accused, Laura, here's the problem is anytime anyone is falsely accused, they react with anger. If they didn't react with anger, I would be more concerned. If you just took it kind of lying down, well, they're saying these bad things, then you would start to say, well, maybe there's some truth to it. But this president has been consistent in pushing back. I'm glad that he has, but there does need to be the day of reckoning. All eyes are going to be on Senator Lindsey Graham as he goes forth with the investigation, because sadly, the Democrats on the House side are not interested in transparency. They're interested in a political narrative that they're trying to support.
Now, and again, it was their desire to have this all true. So now that this information has come out, they've had to pivot to a new understanding or a new some type of new framing around this. And this is what Dick Blumenthal, a senator from Connecticut, said on CNN this morning. Let's listen.
I do not deeply respect and trust the Barr summary, which was designed to frame the message before the information was available. And he succeeded in creating headlines.
Okay,
Yeah,
so this is what
this
is what the new standard is. This is what the new standard
Laura,
is.
if you're talking about framing the narrative, they're accusing Attorney General Barr, who, by the way, not only did what he said, but did it faster than anybody has ever done it. He's getting the information out there. But you talk about framing the argument. The senator has been framing the argument incorrectly for 2 years. If there was a time, where are the four Pinocchios for the senator, for Adam Schiff, for Eric Swalwell? I mean, where are the four Pinocchios? The Washington Post seems to be silent. They want to give them to the president all the time. It's time they give them to some of these people that have been on cable news network each and every day spouting things that are just not true.
Unbelievable. Mark Meadows, thank you so much for joining us and everything you've done to have a mature and sober approach to these issues, and we're not letting them go. This investigation has got to continue into how this travesty unfolded, who triggered it, the institutions supporting it, all of it. You're listening to the Laura Ingraham Podcast. Megan in Indiana. Megan, welcome.
Great to talk to you.
Go ahead, Megan.
I just wanted to comment about the 2018 election. Now, these people, so many 36 Republican congressmen, retired probably partially because of this Russia hoax. The Democrats were able to take the House back probably partially because of this.
I said this last night. Yeah, I said this last night. I think you're right. Look, they campaigned in part against Trump Trump was the force underlying the Republican Party, and Trump was compromised by Russia. Not every candidate stressed it in the same way, but I think it's pretty clear that that was one major driving force for the electorate. It certainly didn't help the Republicans. Let's put it that way. I think Megan is exactly right. So other news, and we'll learn more about this, but apparently in Chicago, all 16 felony counts for disorderly conduct, and I guess, I'm not sure about the lying to the police, have been dropped. What do we know so far, Raymond Arroyo, about the Empire actor who we understood to have allegedly faked an attack against himself, lied to authorities about MAGA hat wearing thugs, or red hat, became red hat. We had the friends of his on tape at the local hardware store buying all this stuff. He was some liquid was thrown on him, and he went on with Robin Roberts, or not Robin Roberts, Gayle King, right? Was it Gayle King?
No, Robin Roberts.
No, Robin Roberts, and told quite a scary and tale of being a gay man, black man attacked. What do we know?
Well, what we know is police, it wasn't that we just surmised this, Laura. Police came out and said he staged this street attack, he profited in racism and extending it, and that this was an attempt to help him get a pay raise. Well, now, apparently in an agreement with the Chicago Attorney's Office, his record is being expunged. Smollett appeared in an emergency court hearing on Tuesday. Prosecutors told a judge they were dismissing the charges of disorderly conduct and filing a false police report against the 36-year-old actor. A spokesman for the Attorney General's office says there was no plea deal, none, but rather an agreement, and that community service will be required of Smollett. So something did happen. There was a predicate here. Today, all criminal charges against Smollett have been dropped. His record has been wiped clean of the filing of this tragic complaint against him. His defense attorney says, now remember, his defense attorney, Laura, is Mark Garagos,
co-conspirator.
Garagos has been implicated now in the Avenatti extortion cases and embezzlement cases in L.A.
Okay, this is just this is absolutely bizarre. Okay, I don't know about this, but something about this is really strange. And we'll learn more. An agreement has been reached. Well, what's the agreement?
Apparently he's going to be out picking up trash or giving acting classes to kids on the weekends during summer camp in Chicago. But the fact that they're requiring community service means he did something wrong here.
Okay. So he did something. Well, maybe somehow those two Nigerians, were they from Nigeria?
Yes,
Nigerians,
two Nigerian actors.
Did they disappear? I mean, where are they?
I do not know. Remember, they cooperated with authorities and therefore were given, I think they were given protection under this investigation. But the question is, Laura, you know what you're really looking at? Privilege. We hear a lot of talk about privilege. This is privilege writ large, where you can fake an attack and then get off of all charges just because people feel bad. I mean, it's ridiculous. The thousands of dollars wasted, the police manpower wasted in Chicago chasing down this fraudulent hoax. This story makes my blood boil.
Joining us now is Victor Davis Hanson, of course, from the Hoover Institution and a phenomenal writer. His new book, The Case for Trump, just came out. He joins us now. Victor, we're going to get into the Trump deal, but this Jussie Smollett case, I've got to just ask you about this briefly before we get into the travesty that was the Mueller probe. Any thoughts on this? All charges are dropped. He's going to do some type of community service, and they're sealing the entire case. Sealed.
Yeah, I think that this is just speculation. I have a feeling that the district attorney or the prosecuting attorney didn't want a OJ jury nullification psychodrama, so they probably felt they couldn't get a jury that would convict, and then they would bring in racism and all of these other charges. So they thought, you know what? And Smollett had said that he was going to fight, and he was building a community resistance effort to support him, and I think he thought, I'm in the driver's seat, so he may cut a deal, but it's not really a deal. He gets off with everything. There's no criminal record, so it's a bad thing to do.
Well, I guess repercussions. You can lie to authorities. You can make up attacks. You can claim racism, and you can just get away with it, picking up trash on the weekends.
Absolutely. I mean, he had become a hero of the community. That's what he was saying all the time. He was on talk shows and radio shows that he was being persecuted. So I think his attorneys went and said, you really want to have a show trial in Chicago because you're not going to win this. And they were probably right. They wouldn't.
No. Well, I think that's an excellent point. Of course, I'm not even thinking about how or whether a fair proceeding could be had in Chicago and prosecutorial priorities and the other fish to fry, et cetera. Victor, this is what our friends over there at MSNBC are pivoting to this morning after the Mueller summary comes out. No collusion, no evidence, and not enough evidence to conclude or see any obstruction because also no underlying crime. And now this is what they're moving to. Let's listen.
I think what's happening here is that Trump and his people are trying to discredit the entire canon of Russia-related reporting,
right?
Irrespective of.
By the way, if you watched last night, you've heard a lot of those clowns actually suggest that any Russian interference with the 2016 campaign, was a scam. They were sounding like Vladimir Putin last night. By the way, they were sounding like Russian state-run television last night.
Russian state television. They haven't changed one iota after this report.
Yeah, that's factually incorrect because you've had the two reporters who really started the whole media collusion with the dossier, Michael Iskoff and David Korn, who published before the election all of these rumors to damage the Trump campaign. They've already admitted yesterday that it didn't make sense because if Trump was in control of a Russian collusion narrative, then he wouldn't have had to send somebody over to find out what WikiLeaks was going to leak. And I think Iskoff said, well, they accused Don Jr. or the rest of these people of trying to finagle with WikiLeaks to get an advance notice. But why would they have to do that if they were working with the Russians and the Russians knew it? They would just give it. So the two perpetrators have now recanted and said this dossier was not founded and we were misled. So I think that MSC cable hosts are in a dilemma because the very people they're relying on have already contradicted their own new narrative.
Well, how about Brennan saying he doesn't know if he received bad information, but he suspected that there was more than there actually was. But then he goes, well, it's not surprising. It's a high bar for criminal conspiracy. That's what he said yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, he's so hubristic. He hasn't, nemesis coming, because remember, he lied under oath to the Senate about snooping on the Senate staff computers. He lied to the Senate about the drone attacks. And he really did cede that dossier to Harry Reid. He's got a lot of criminal exposure, I think, and I think he's going to be one of the first people that we being the people, should be looking at in the aftermath of all this. Because if Mueller set the standard, if you lie to a federal official, we're going to go after you. Or if you obstruct justice, we're going to go after you. If you leak, we're going to go after you. If you collude, we're going to go after you. Well, Brendan's got a lot of exposure. So does Comey. So does McCabe. They really obstructed the working of a FISA court by not giving them the necessary information to make a decision. They unmasked names that was illegally. They saw that they were leaked to the press. They lied under oath in the case of McCabe and probably Comey as well. And they hired a foreign national, Laura. I mean, they hired a citizen of a foreign country, Christopher Steele, to go work with other foreign nationals to undermine a rival campaign with the knowledge of Obama. I think the real question is, to what degree did Obama, was he ever briefed by Loretta Lynch or by McCabe or Comey or by Susan Wright about what was going on?
Well, what do you think needs to happen as far as a reckoning here, Victor? What should Barr absolutely get to the bottom of in order to really have some type of reset in this entire process and perhaps people going to jail?
Well, I think he's been pretty clever the way he's used Rod Rosenstein. Rod Rosenstein, remember, was the heart of the whole thing. He worked with McCabe to sort of that palace coup. He signed a FISA warrant. He wrote the memo about how to fire Comey, and yet he's still there. And I think Barr sees that the left has praised him so much that there being a dilemma suddenly to turn on him. So I think with the Inspector General Horowitz and with Rod Rosenstein, Barr is going to try to use existing staff members to go after these people, because otherwise, if you get a special counsel, the very idea of a special counsel has been pretty much tarnished now by the Mueller investigation.
Well,
and I don't think we'll ever see one again in our lifetime.
Well, I have to say that there is not only domestic repercussions here, or the ripple effects domestically that were so bad. So many people caught up in this, all the money spent on lawyers, all the hours and hours were spent, but also the opportunities that we don't know, we can't really quantify what opportunities were lost, missed opportunities for our government, for our policy, for maybe even on occasion working with Russia, because
absolutely.
This investigation was hanging over Trump.
Yeah, I've written about that. I mean, Kissinger was right when he said we want to always make sure that China and Russia are no better friend to each other than each one is to us. And so on matters of Iran, on Venezuela, or North Korea, we could have triangulated and used Russia as a foil in various scenarios. We couldn't do it, and the irony was that if you look at exactly what Trump did with arming Ukrainians or attacking Russian mercenaries in Syria, or they beefed up sanctions, oil production, he was so much tougher on Russia than was the Obama-McFaul reset, and yet he couldn't do anything. If he mentioned the word Russia, he was considered a treasonous president or a traitor. So we lost that really important lever in American foreign policy.
Yeah, so China, we didn't have any opportunity to box out China, and so now Russia and China are doing joint military exercises.
They are. We'll see if I think we're lucky that we have two really capable people in Pompeo and Bolton, and maybe they can restore some use of the Russian card. I hope they can. But have you noticed, I've noticed listening to people and getting in arguments with people, the left has a new narrative, and it is, well, if you guys believe that the Mueller team was biased from the outset, maybe it was, and that's even good for you, because that shows you that even a biased team exonerated Trump. And then that argument, of course, assumes that 22 months and $30 million didn't do any damage to people like Michael Flynn or Carter Page or the country at large, or as you say, the foreign policy. So that's their new argument. let's just call it quits. And maybe they were biased, but that works in your favor because they found your guy exonerated. Let's just forget it. And I don't think that's going to happen.
Victor, on the issue of the relationship with Russia, now all these people who are all on board with the Hillary reset and thinking it's time to turn the page from the old, Cold War era, we've entered this new period, Reagan's long gone, now it's, reset the relationship. Now, this is what the genius of Crazy Mazie Hirono from Hawaii is saying.
So just because there was not enough evidence for a criminal charge of conspiracy does not mean that this very cozy relationship that Donald Trump has with Vladimir Putin, who, by the way, must be really happy that this came about, that this kind of cozy relationship that is not good for our country, in that it's not transparent, will continue.
So that's it now. It's a cozy relationship. It's too cozy. It's inappropriate contact. That's what they've moved to.
I don't think that. I mean, I was at Stanford when the ambassador under Obama, Mike McFaul, my colleague, brought in the Russian ambassador to the United States. They had a big cozy dinner, and just before Trump was elected, the whole idea was, tell Vladimir that I'll be more flexible after the elections type of appeasement. And so the ambassador Kislyak in Washington was just loved by the left. He appeared in photo ops with all of them. So I don't think that's going to work very well. And we're going to see a lot of that. But the bottom line is that they used that dossier to get as an insurance policy in anticipation of a landslide victory in 2006. They being Obama officials and Hillary Clinton campaign colluders along with the media. And then when that didn't work out, it became a secondary transformation into aborting a presidency and maybe even being a preemptive defense for a lot of people who had legal exposure. So when you talk about John Brennan and Clapper going on TV, these were people who had both lied under oath to Congress and had seeded that dossier and may have had advanced knowledge of informants in the FBI, et cetera. And so now that all of that's out, I think Trump will be advised by his lawyers to start issuing documents and releasing information with no redactions. And let's see what it shows up.
We're talking to Victor Davis Hanson here on the Laura Ingraham podcast. And meanwhile, as all of this Russia Mueller report was unfolding, we have another growing caravan approaching the United States. We're on track for now almost 100,000 families, 120,000 families have been released into America since December. 76,000 individuals crossing the border in the month of February. It looks like more now in the month of March. What now? Doesn't Trump have to now crack down on this? I mean, this is just ridiculous.
Yeah, he does. Except he's starting to look prescient, and he warned people when he evoked a national emergency that in the spring and summer when the weather got more conducive, these caravans would start reappearing, and they're going to do that. So we should expect by June it's going to be a massive influx. He's going to have a much greater argument. And as someone who lives in an area where illegal immigration is rampant, I can tell you in May, June, and July, the whole atmosphere changes. People come in warm weather. And I think you're going to see that happen. And you know what? It's sort of a sign of things with the Southern Poverty Law Center imploding, the college admissions scam, that's the Mueller investigation, this new caravan, and then all of these lunatic positions by the progressives, whether it's reparations or infanticide. You're starting to see the wages of hardcore progressivism, and they lead nowhere but to nihilism. And so I think they've really been hurt by this, Laura, and I think that maybe in a week, if Trump plays his cards right and his tweets right, he'll get back up to 50% in some major poll.
Well, he should be up to 50%. He should be up at 58%. Janet Napolitano, former DHS secretary, she was on CNN this morning and said this.
The Pentagon just announced last night that it has transferred this $1 billion from its military personnel budget to build these 57 miles of fencing along the border. Is that a good use of its money?
Look, as I say in my book, a wall is a symbol. It's not a strategy. And really, for the southwest border, you need a combination of manpower and technology, air cover, and you need to focus on the actual ports of entry and the kind of technology deployed at the points of entry. So to effectively reappropriate money from other essential uses to build more structure along the border, to me, is security theater. It's not really security.
Well, she says it's a symbol, but walls have protected man and mankind for millennia.
Yeah, I don't put much currency in her. She gave us the term, remember, overseas contingency operations for terrorism. She said that when she was working for Obama that the greatest threat we had were returning vets that could be potential terrorists. And she oversees a UC campus where there's a state law that says you can't use race as a determinant in hiring or admissions, and yet we know that her campus has systematically discriminated against Asians for years. So it's just another idea that you go on the offensive, you make these statements, and you're never held accountable for your own record. Anyway.
No, to me, again, for the Obama folks to be saying and trying to act like this is somehow returning to like East German style Brandenburg wall is ridiculous. I mean, they're the ones who were saying that all these people who came across the border in 2014, they would all have to go home. That's what President Obama said. You don't come because you're gonna be sent back. And then suddenly,
Hillary Clinton she trumped that. She trumped that and said, "Don't think that unattended children won't be sent back, i.e., by themselves." It's sort of Orwellian now.
Yeah, well, this is absolutely Victor Davis Hanson here on the Laura Ingraham Show. We have a lot more to get to. Again, your phone calls. All you have to do is email us at ingram.podcast@gmail.com. That's ingram.podcast@gmail.com. More on the issue of immigration. A new migrant caravan now of 1,500 people, including 700 Cubans, has crossed from Guatemala into Mexico on foot and is expected to arrive at the U.S. border in the coming weeks. Because they're all just shipped up. They're all just getting on trucks, buses, and they come right up. The group is different than previous caravans that have embarked from Central America's Northern Triangle. This is in the Washington Examiner. Because a large number of Cuban citizens now have joined the predominantly Central American group. I wonder who arranged for that. That's very strange. Cubans are joining the caravan after Mexico's National Institute of Migration closed its office in the southern state of Chiapas earlier this month, stranding about 2,000 people. The stranded group is legally unable to remain in Mexico, prompting many instead to go to the Central American group in hopes of making it to the U.S., claiming asylum. Oh, my gosh. Raymond Arroyo is with us. This asylum deal is, I mean, if the Republicans do not make this a massive issue, we have all these people who've gotten in under a credible fear screening. It's called credible fear, and then they have an asylum hearing years later that, of course, they never show up for. But we've had people who are here on credible fear screenings who go on to kill people, run them over, DWI, document fraud, all the other stuff that's happening.
It's unbelievable. And it goes on and on.
Jeez.
And for whatever reason, both parties just keep looking away on this. Now, to be fair, there was a movement in the Republican ranks under Paul Ryan to change these asylum laws, but there was no majority, and he didn't lead on it. Neither did Mitch McConnell. So there you are. You left the president all alone flipping in the wind, basically.
Last Thursday, an illegal alien in Mobile, Alabama, crossed a highway median and killed a local private school teacher in a head-on collision. The alien, 16 years old, was initially denied asylum upon crossing the Mexico border in 2017, but was nonetheless free in the nation's interior, despite his having also received a final deportation order. I talked about this last night, or in last week and the week before. Trump needs to make it a priority for ICE to remove those individuals here under final orders of deportation. They've already gotten their due process. No one can argue with that. They need to be found and they need to be deported from this country before they have children and then claim that they can't be deported. Those people have to be sent out of this country. We have a dead school teacher who apparently was a lovely individual. Her family members are speaking out. They are just beside themselves, livid. So, and these we could do these stories all day, every day. Every day, all day, we could do this. You're listening to the Laura Ingraham podcast. So we haven't even talked about Michael Avenatti, really. I mean, that was another thing that happened yesterday, and he was arrested on extortion regarding Nike. Apparently, he said he had a story about how Nike was paying players, and it was some NCAA story about some college basketball players, and Nike went to the authorities, and they concluded that he was actually trying to extort Nike from a lot of money, millions of dollars, $20 million. And this was after he came out of his hearing in New York, in New York State Court. He said this.
For the entirety of my career, I have fought against the powerful people and powerful corporations. I will never stop fighting that good fight. I am highly confident that when all of the evidence is laid bare in connection with these cases, when it is all known, when due process occurs, that I will be fully exonerated and justice will be done.
Well, didn't he say he was going to come up with that evidence about how Brett Kavanaugh wasn't he spiking punch bowls? Was it
right?
He had more women who were going to come forward on the. Was he involved in the gang rape allegations too?
Yes.
It's all a blur.
He represented that
Swetnick,
woman who claims there were the rape trains at the
Julie Swetnick
at the parties.
Well, there's a criminal referral at the Justice Department now about Avenatti. And as I've been saying for months and months and months, we need to see action on this stuff. We need to see people have to pay for their wrongdoing. Now, we don't know what happened with this DA in Chicago. Apparently, the police are very upset that Jussie Smollett's case was dropped. They're very upset about it. So we don't know the real story there, but it seems like they were trying to avoid some big racial situation. Or they were just they knew it was going to look really bad for racial politics in Chicago. I'm just speculating, but the Smollett case was just a nightmare for them because it laid bare a lot of the thinking regarding hoaxes in the United States and hoax hate crimes. We've seen this happen before, and they didn't want any part of it.
Pull hate crime hoaxes in Chicago if you're a celebrity.
Different, yeah, and I guess they're right. They're different standards of justice. Meaning, if you're a celebrity and a minority and a double minority, then you can hire a couple people from another country and have yourself attacked and give a big interview and try to save your career with it. I mean, and Raymond, do you have any doubt that they'll just give him a big hug over there at Empire, the Empire producers? Will give him a big hug.
One would hope. Absolutely, no. They're gonna welcome him back with open arms next season, assuming the show goes on. But the big problem here is the message it sends that if you want to get attention, if you want a pay raise, the way to do it, and to be a victim, which is a celebrity today, the way to do it is to stage a hoax, make it a grand one, and there'll be no consequences for you. You'll get community service, raking leaves in the fall, and that'll be a photo op and no doubt a People magazine spread at how generous he is with the community. This Smollett thing reeks to high heaven. The DA should be thrown in jail. By the way, there is a case against her. The police referred her to federal inquiry about her corruption because they thought she wasn't following through properly on prosecutions. So there is a long-going problem with her, ongoing.
Well, again, I can't imagine the police chief is happy about this, but he's not going to be able to say anything now. He can't say anything. I mean, none of these guys are going to be able to say anything. unless they retire or something. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, David Brooks has written a column in the New York Times today.
Oh, they steal my heart.
Oh, we've all just made fools of ourselves again. So he quotes from some of the more outrageous claims from Schiff and John Brennan. Trump's, guilty of treason, Rachel Maddow, Rob Reiner. Then he said, his concluding sentence after that is, maybe it's time to declare a national Sabbath. Maybe it's time to step back from the scandal mongering and assess who we are right now. Now, why don't you assess who you are? I assess who we are. We didn't get it wrong. I love how he's lumping us. Then he goes, Democrats might approach this moment with an attitude of humility and honest self-examination. It's clear that many Democrats made grievous accusations against the president that are not supported by the evidence. Then he says, Republicans and Sean Hannity-style Trumpians might also approach this moment with an attitude of humility and honest self-examination. So he lumps Hannity in with all the people who lied about Trump. For 2 years, they've been calling the Mueller investigation a witch hunt. For 2 years, they've been spreading the libel that there are no honest brokers in Washington. It's all a deep state conspiracy, a swamp. They should apologize for peddling the sort of deep cynicism that undermines our country's institutions. Oh, please. What? I mean, come on. So now it's Hannity because Hannity and the rest of us knew from the beginning that this investigation never should have taken place? We're the problem? Nice try, David. Oh, and then here's the third paragraph. And what about the rest of us? What about all the hours we spent speculating about the Mueller report, fantasizing about the Trump ruin, or watching and reading speculation about these things? What about the superstructure of scandal politics we have built and live in today? The sad fact is that Watergate introduced a poison into the American body politic. Richard Nixon's downfall was just as important, but it opened up a mouth-watering possibility that you don't need to do the hard work of persuading people to join your side. Instead, you can destroy your foes all at once through scandal. Oh, so he's saying he's trying to make himself be this. He's more of an unbiased person just watching the whole thing implode. Oh, please. And so it's all just, everyone just was there scandal mongering. So the left and the right deserve co-equal responsibility.
If you could just be nicer, people's lives wouldn't hurt so much, Laura.
And then he claims that the Democrats won the 2018 midterms by focusing on the issues, not on collusion. For most voters, politics is about their lives, not a self-righteous TV show. It's all about us. That's about us. That last line is about yours truly. Self-righteous TV show? How about a television show that was ahead of the curve on immigration, trade, and why this investigation was wrong from the first place? As you're sitting there going to your fat cat think tank boondoggle conferences here and abroad, okay, navel gazing about how you're the only honest broker in the room. Give me a break. David Brooks, this whole crowd at the New York Times, they all speak to themselves, though, really. I mean, I just gave them more publicity than they deserve. For the Democrats won the 2018 midterms by focusing on the issues, not collusion. I guess he could be talking about self-righteous TV shows like Meadows and stuff, too. I guess he could be talking about that. But he said, the ray of hope is that on our campaign trail, voters rarely ask about the scandals du jour. Well, yeah, that's why we've been talking about how to seal the border, what happens when we have a mass crush of humanity crossing the border and we can't track these people. That's why we've been talking about China's military and economic dominance. When David Brooks was out there protecting this globalism and globalist attitudes and trade, we've been exposing it. We are decades ahead of David Brooks. So I can tell you that right now. I don't have any patience for that. Let's go to Lori in California. Lori, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I mean, I just want to say it's so true. The mainstream media, they turn everything around. They get caught in a lie. They get caught in spreading false information. And they turn around and say, well, Sean Hannity did this, or Laura Ingraham did this, or Judge Jeanine. I mean, it's just disgusting how they're constantly getting caught. And then they say, well, let's just move on. But, here's the thing. When the mainstream media is spreading 92% 24/7 false information about Trump. People start hating other people. Not only did they go after Trump, but they also went after us people who voted for Trump. They incited violence. They knowingly did it without regard to any of the consequences. I mean, now look at the hate now and the divisiveness now. And it's because the mainstream media constantly manipulates the minds of their viewers over and over and over. They spread these false, fake narratives. And it's disgusting, Laura.
Well, it doesn't surprise me. The Democrats have they have a genetic, predetermined ability to flip the script and reframe a narrative, pivot, and keep going on the attack. By the way, more from about the meltdown and how it went down, Joe Scarborough.
So you can keep lying. You can keep saying your misogynistic statements. You can keep saying that Hispanics are breeders or they bring diseases to America. You're lecturing the Washington Post and the New York Times on journalism. And by the way, if you write for these papers, and there's some people I respect that write for these papers that have actually written columns condemning the media's behavior, be ashamed of yourself. Be ashamed of yourself.
That man has literally no shame. I mean, he's just completely sold out to the smear masters at MSNBC. This is a congressman from conservative Florida, conservative part of the Panhandle, and this is who he is now. Wow. You're listening to the Laura Ingraham podcast. Delighted you're with us as always. Remember what he said, by the way, Joe Scarborough, just a few years back.
If Donald Trump somehow happened to be president of the United States and get elected, he would know what to do. He would put really good people around him. And you know what? We talk about how would he negotiate against Vladimir Putin? He'd figure that out. Donald Trump goes into the negotiations, and it's a zero-sum game. And he sets himself up so he wins, and you lose. He is a tough, mean, incredibly successful negotiator.
Well, that's when, I guess, Trump was talking to them. Isn't that funny? Kim in Texas. Let's go, Kim.
Hey, Laura. This is my opinion. If the Democrats and the media don't face any consequences for this heartbreak, chaos, and civil war they've created, then I believe it's game over for our country. And I liken it to raising a child. You spank your child when they're not able to understand that crossing the street without looking will kill them. The fear of the spanking keeps them from potentially harming themselves and the heart of the parent. And in time, they grow up and they grow to understand why it was necessary. It's time to spank the Democrats.
I don't think I'll put that on a T-shirt. That won't probably sound good coming from me. But I think repercussions, real repercussions. And this is where 2020, I think, is going to be a watershed moment for the country. I know we say this every election. But in 2020, we're going to have a choice to vote for socialism or vote for a prudent, realistic approach to foreign policy and a pro-growth economic path that has triggered one of the greatest periods of economic expansion and growth and wages going up that we've seen since really the mid-'80s. And I can't imagine the country's going to pick socialism. Democrats will try to make it sound like they're going to give you all this stuff for free and you're going to get incrementally better health care. But Trump's just got to keep speaking